Deep in the Montana wilderness, twin brothers Marcus and Daniel have walked thousands of miles searching for something they can't name. After years of drifting from trail to trail, carrying everything they own on their backs, they discover an abandoned cabin tucked away in a forgotten valley. The structure stands weathered but solid, like it's been waiting for them. Inside, they find remnants of a soldier's life, military photos, handwritten letters, and personal belongings that speak of battles fought long ago. As they clean decades of dust from the windows and sweep pine needles from the floors, they decide this forgotten place will become their home. But when they begin uncovering the soldiers' carefully hidden secrets, they realize this cabin holds more than just memories. What family secret connects these brothers to a soldier they've never met? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had always been the one to make decisions. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had learned early that hesitation could mean the difference between survival and disaster. His weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who built shelter from nothing, who could read weather patterns in cloud formations, and who knew which berries would sustain them through lean days. Daniel, younger by 11 minutes but older in contemplation, followed his brother's lead while maintaining his own careful observations of the world around them. Their hiking journal, worn smooth by Daniel's constant handling, contained 3 years of meticulous entries. Every town they'd passed through, every trail they'd conquered, every moment of doubt or discovery had been recorded in Daniel's precise handwriting. The pages revealed a pattern that even they hadn't fully recognized until now. They weren't just wandering, they were searching. The search had begun after their adoptive mother's funeral, when the small house they'd grown up in felt suddenly too confining, too full of unanswered questions. Their father had supposedly abandoned them when they were toddlers, leaving only vague memories and a lingering sense of incompleteness. Their mother had raised them with love, but also with silence about their early years, deflecting questions with gentle firmness that grew more strained as they aged. Marcus remembered the moment they decided to leave, standing in the kitchen where their mother had made countless meals, surrounded by the possessions of a life well lived but somehow incomplete. He'd looked at Daniel and simply said, "We need to go." Daniel had nodded, understanding without explanation. Within a week, they'd sold everything, bought quality hiking gear, and stepped onto the first trail that led away from everything familiar. The weight they carried wasn't just physical. Marcus bore a weathered military surplus pack that held their shelter, cooking equipment, and emergency supplies. His movements were efficient, economical, shaped by an instinct for survival that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than experience. Daniel's pack contained their clothes, medical supplies, and the tools that fed his artistic soul: sketchbooks, pencils, a small watercolor set that had survived thousands of miles of rough handling. They developed rhythms over their wandering years. Marcus would scout ahead, reading terrain and weather, making decisions about direction and shelter. Daniel would document their journey, sketching landscapes that captured not just the visual beauty, but the emotional weight of their travels. In the evenings, they'd sit by carefully built fires, Marcus maintaining their gear while Daniel wrote in the journal, both of them comfortable in the silences that had replaced the need for constant conversation. Their bond had been forged through shared loss and mutual dependence. When Marcus had broken his ankle crossing a creek in Oregon, Daniel had engineered a splint and helped him walk 15 miles to the nearest road. When Daniel had fallen into a deep depression during a particularly harsh winter in Wyoming, Marcus had found them shelter and waited patiently for his brother's darkness to lift. They'd learned to read each other's moods, to anticipate needs, to function as a single unit despite their different temperaments. The trail that led them to the hidden valley had appeared on no map Daniel could find. It was little more than a deer path, barely visible among the undergrowth, marked only by a hand-carved wooden marker that bore the simple inscription, "ST." The marker showed signs of military precision in its construction, each cut deliberate and measured. Something about it had called to Marcus in a way he couldn't explain, pulling him toward the narrow passage between two towering pine trees. The valley beyond had taken their breath away. Nestled in a natural bowl between steep mountain faces, it felt protected, hidden from the outside world by design rather than accident. A clear stream ran through its center, providing fresh water and the gentle sound of moving water that seemed to wash away the accumulated weariness of years on the trail. The cabin sat near the far end of the valley, positioned to overlook the entire space, while remaining partially concealed by mature trees. When they'd first approached the structure, Marcus had felt something shift inside him, a recognition that went beyond logic. The cabin was solid, built by someone who understood both construction and concealment. Its logs were weathered to a silver gray that blended with the surrounding forest, and its roof, though old, showed signs of careful maintenance. Windows faced multiple directions, offering views of all approaches to the valley. Daniel had been the first to notice the details that suggested recent habitation. The wood pile was too neat, too well protected to have been abandoned for very long. The windows, though dusty, showed no signs of damage. The door, secured with a simple but effective lock, opened to reveal an interior that felt more like a temporary absence than true abandonment. Standing in that doorway, looking at the remnants of someone else's carefully constructed life, both brothers had felt the same certainty settle over them. This place was different. This place was home. The topographical map they found pinned to the cabin's interior wall told a story of careful observation and tactical thinking. Someone had taken a standard geological survey map and transformed it into something far more detailed. Penciled notations marked water sources that didn't appear on the official version, safe camping spots indicated by small circles, and alternate routes sketched in faint lines that suggested intimate knowledge of the terrain. Marcus studied the additions, while Daniel explored the cabin's main room. The handwriting was precise, military in its efficiency, with abbreviations that spoke of formal training. OP marked what were likely observation posts on higher elevations. LZ appeared near flat areas suitable for helicopter landings. Most intriguingly, several locations were marked with cache, followed by numbers, suggesting hidden supply depots scattered throughout the wilderness. The valley itself revealed its secrets slowly as they explored beyond the cabin. What had initially appeared to be a natural formation showed subtle signs of human engineering. The stream had been carefully channeled to provide maximum water flow while creating natural barriers. Certain trees had been selectively removed to create clear sightlines while maintaining the appearance of undisturbed forest. Rock formations that seemed random actually provided concealed positions with commanding views of all approaches. Daniel discovered the first evidence of the valley's true purpose near a cluster of boulders that formed a natural amphitheater. Hidden beneath an overhang, barely visible unless approached from exactly the right angle, were the remains of an old fire pit. The stones had been blackened by countless fires, arranged in a pattern that would minimize smoke and light signature. Nearby, barely perceptible scratches in the rock face formed letters. Sanctuary, 1987. The cabin's exterior showed similar attention to tactical considerations. Windows were positioned to provide overlapping fields of view, ensuring no blind spots in the surrounding area. The roof was constructed with materials that would blend with aerial surveillance, and the chimney was designed to disperse smoke in a way that would be difficult to spot from a distance. A casual observer might see a simple wilderness retreat, but Marcus recognized the hallmarks of a safe house designed by someone with professional training. As evening approached, they prepared to spend their first night in the valley. Marcus checked the cabin's structural integrity, while Daniel gathered firewood, both of them moving with the practiced efficiency of years spent in temporary shelters. But this felt different. The valley embraced them with a sense of security they hadn't experienced since childhood. As if the mountains themselves stood guard against the outside world, the cabin's interior revealed layers of habitation spanning decades. The furniture was simple but well crafted, built to last rather than impress. A wood stove dominated one corner, its chimney drawing perfectly and its firebox sized for both heating and cooking. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty now, but showing the dust patterns of books and equipment that had been carefully removed. Daniel found himself drawn to subtle, artistic touches that humanized the utilitarian space. A hand-carved chess set sat on a small table, its pieces worn smooth by countless games. Pencil sketches covered one wall, depicting the valley through different seasons, suggesting years of patient observation. The artist had captured not just the visual details, but the emotional resonance of the place, showing it as both fortress and sanctuary. The basement, accessed through a well-concealed trapdoor, revealed the full extent of the previous occupants' preparations. Stone walls kept the space dry and temperature stable year-round. Heavy wooden shelves held the remnants of long-term food storage, with empty canning jars and root vegetable bins showing evidence of serious self-sufficiency planning. A workbench occupied one corner, its surface scarred by years of maintenance and repair work. Marcus felt a deep recognition as he examined the basement's layout. Everything was positioned for maximum efficiency and security. Tools were arranged with military precision, each item having its designated place. Emergency supplies were stored in multiple locations, ensuring redundancy in case of compromise. Most telling were the communications equipment mounts, empty now, but clearly designed for sophisticated radio gear, as they settled in for their first night, using their own sleeping bags on the cabin's simple bed frames. Both brothers experienced something they hadn't felt in years, the absence of the need to move on. The valley held them with gentle but firm hands, offering not just shelter but belonging. The mysterious previous occupant had created more than a hiding place. He had built a home designed for people who understood the value of sanctuary. Outside, night sounds settled over the valley with the comfortable rhythm of a place undisturbed by human conflict. An owl called from the ridge above, answered by another from across the stream. Wind moved through the pines with the whisper of ancient conversations, carrying scents of mountain flowers and clean water. For the first time in 3 years of constant movement, Marcus and Daniel fell asleep without planning their next destination. Morning light filtering through the cabin's windows revealed details that darkness had concealed. On the mantelpiece above the wood stove, a military-issued compass sat in a place of honor, its brass surface worn smooth by countless hands. When Marcus picked it up, he found an inscription etched into the back, "To find your way home." MT, the letters were deeply carved, suggesting someone had taken considerable time and care with the engraving. The compass felt substantial in Marcus's palm, its weight speaking of quality construction rather than mass production. The needle pointed true north with unwavering precision, and the face bore the detailed markings of a professional instrument rather than a recreational tool. More intriguingly, tiny scratches around the edge seemed deliberate, as if someone had used a pin or knife tip to mark specific bearings that held personal significance. Daniel emerged from the kitchen area, holding a coffee pot that still contained the remnants of what must have been the previous occupant's final morning brew. The grounds had long since dried to dust, but the ritual of coffee making was evidenced by the careful arrangement of supplies near a hand-pumped water spigot. A manual coffee grinder sat nearby, its handle worn smooth by daily use, surrounded by empty cans that had once held premium beans. The cabin's main room functioned as both living space and command center. A large wooden table dominated the center, its surface scarred by years of use but meticulously maintained. Maps, books, and papers had once covered this surface, evidenced by rectangular fade marks in the wood's finish. Built-in storage benches lined the walls, their cushions bearing the impressions of someone who had spent countless hours planning, reading, and waiting. Marcus found himself cataloging the room's defensive capabilities, while Daniel focused on its human touches. The windows were fitted with heavy shutters that could be secured from inside, transforming the cozy space into a fortress when necessary. Thick log walls would stop small arms fire, and the stone foundation provided additional protection. Yet the space retained warmth through small details: hand-sewn curtains, a braided rug worn soft by bare feet, and oil lamps positioned to provide gentle illumination without revealing the cabin's presence to outside observers. The bedroom area, separated from the main room by a heavy wool blanket that served as a movable wall, contained two single beds built into opposite corners. The construction suggested long-term habitation by more than one person, though the personal belongings they'd discovered seemed to belong to a single occupant. One bed showed more wear than the other, its mattress compressed by years of use. While the second appeared barely touched, Daniel discovered a collection of books tucked into a built-in shelf beside the more used bed. The titles revealed an eclectic mind. Technical manuals on wilderness survival and radio communications sat alongside volumes of poetry and philosophy. Several books bore marginalia in the same precise handwriting they'd seen on the map annotations. Comments ranged from tactical observations to deeply personal. Reflections on solitude and purpose. The kitchen area demonstrated the same attention to both function and comfort that characterized the rest of the cabin. A hand-pumped well provided fresh water directly into a stone sink, while a gravity-fed system supplied a small bathroom area. The wood stove served double duty for both heating and cooking, with a cleverly designed oven compartment that could bake bread or roast meat with precise temperature control. Most fascinating to Marcus was the communication setup that had once occupied a corner near the largest window. Empty mounting brackets suggested sophisticated radio equipment, while a carefully disguised antenna wire ran up one wall and disappeared into the roof structure. Whoever had lived here maintained contact with the outside world, despite choosing isolation. As they prepared their own simple meal that first evening, both brothers found themselves moving carefully through the space, as if the previous occupant might return at any moment. The cabin retained an inhabited feeling despite its emptiness, as if decades of careful living had imbued the very walls with personality and purpose. Daniel sketched while Marcus cooked, both of them drawn to document this place that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. The compass sat between them on the table, its presence somehow comforting despite the mystery of its inscription. Meti could be initials, Marcus realized, though whether of the person who gave it or received it remained unclear. The comfort they felt in the space went beyond its physical amenities. Something about the cabin's proportions, its orientation to the surrounding landscape, and the thoughtful placement of every element created an atmosphere of deep security. The previous occupant had understood not just how to survive in isolation, but how to create a space that nurtured the human spirit during long periods of solitude. As darkness settled over the valley, they built their first fire in the wood stove, using seasoned wood from the carefully maintained pile outside. The stove drew perfectly, filling the room with gentle warmth, while the chimney dispersed smoke so efficiently that no trace was visible from outside. Even this detail spoke of professional knowledge applied to personal comfort. That night, sleeping in beds that felt somehow familiar despite being used for the first time, both brothers experienced dreams filled with images of the compass pointing toward destinations they couldn't quite remember. The inscription echoed in their unconscious minds. To find your way home. They were beginning to understand that finding this place might not have been accident, but destination. The compass, with its mysterious inscription and careful placement, seemed to watch over their first night of true rest in 3 years of wandering. 3 days into their exploration of the cabin, Daniel noticed something that Marcus's more practical eye had missed. The floorboards in the main room didn't quite align properly near the eastern wall. While Marcus focused on reinforcing loose window frames and checking the roof for winter damage, Daniel found himself studying the subtle irregularities in the wood grain and board spacing. The discovery came while he was sketching the interior layout, trying to capture the way morning light fell across the hand-hewn floors. One section of flooring produced a slightly different sound when walked upon, a hollow note that suggested empty space beneath. When he knelt to examine the boards more closely, he found nearly invisible hinges disguised within the wood grain and a catch mechanism hidden along the wall's base molding. The concealed steel lockbox lay in the space beneath the loose floorboard, nestled into a purpose-built cavity lined with waterproof material. The box itself was military specification, designed to protect sensitive documents from both environmental damage and unauthorized access. Its surface bore no identifying marks except for a series of numbers etched into one corner, coordinates that Daniel recognized as latitude and longitude for their exact location. Marcus's reaction to the discovery revealed instincts that surprised even his brother. He approached the hidden compartment with the systematic caution of someone trained in handling potentially dangerous materials. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he examined the lockbox for signs of tampering or booby traps, checking weight distribution and listening for internal movement before attempting to manipulate the locking mechanism. "This isn't amateur work," Marcus said, running his fingers along the box's sealed edges. "Whoever built this hiding place knew what they were doing. Military engineering, professional grade." He paused, studying the mechanism. "The question is whether we have any right to open it." Daniel understood his brother's hesitation. They were guests in this place, beneficiaries of someone else's careful preparation and planning. Opening the lockbox felt like a violation of trust, even though its owner had apparently vanished years ago. Yet the coordinates etched into the metal seemed like an invitation, as if the box had been left specifically for people who would find this exact location. The ethical debate continued through the afternoon as they worked on other cabin improvements. Marcus argued for respecting the previous occupants' privacy, while Daniel countered that understanding the cabin's history might be essential for their own safety. The arrival of unexpected visitors would settle the argument in ways neither brother anticipated. The sound of vehicles on the mountain road above reached them just after sunset. Marcus immediately extinguished the oil lamps, while Daniel moved to the window that provided the best view of the valley's single entrance. Through gathering dusk, they watched 3 black SUVs navigate the narrow track that led toward their hidden sanctuary. "Government plates," Marcus whispered, his military training evident in how quickly he'd assessed the threat. "Federal agents or military contractors? They're not here for a social visit." The vehicles stopped just outside the valley's natural entrance, and armed men emerged to establish a perimeter. Their movements showed professional coordination, and their equipment was too sophisticated for routine law enforcement. Daniel counted at least 8 individuals, all carrying weapons and communication gear that suggested serious intent. From their concealed position inside the darkened cabin, the brothers listened to fragments of radio chatter carried on the mountain wind. Words like intelligence, recovery, and sanitization reached them clearly enough to understand that these visitors were searching for something specific, something connected to the cabin and its missing occupant. "They know about this place," Daniel whispered. "They're not exploring randomly. They have maps, coordinates, maybe even surveillance photos." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which means whoever lived here was involved in something that's still considered active business. The kind of business that brings federal agents into the wilderness after dark." The search team spent nearly 2 hours methodically examining the valley's perimeter before approaching the cabin itself. Their discipline was impressive, but also revealing. These weren't investigators following cold leads. They were professionals conducting a recovery operation for materials they knew existed and locations they'd been briefed to examine. When the team finally departed, their vehicles disappearing back up the mountain road, Both brothers understood that their situation had fundamentally changed. The cabin wasn't just an abandoned wilderness retreat. It was the center of something that powerful people still considered important enough to monitor and search. The steel lockbox, sitting unopened in its hiding place, had transformed from an ethical dilemma into a necessity. Whatever secrets it contained were clearly significant enough to bring armed federal agents into the mountains. Understanding those secrets might be the only way to ensure their own safety in a place they'd hoped would provide sanctuary. "We open it tomorrow," Marcus said finally. "Whatever's inside, we need to know what we're dealing with." Daniel nodded, though he wondered if they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return to simple anonymity. The surveillance photograph fell from between the pages of a water-damaged manual they found while cleaning the cabin's storage areas the next morning. The image was professional quality, taken with a telephoto lens from a considerable distance. It showed Marcus and Daniel clearly recognizable as they'd approached the cabin 3 days earlier. Their faces captured in sharp detail, despite the photographer's concealed position. Daniel studied the photograph with growing unease. The angle suggested it had been taken from the ridge above the valley's eastern rim, a position that would require significant climbing skill and patience to reach. More disturbing was the timestamp printed in the corner. The photo had been taken within hours of their arrival, meaning someone had been watching and waiting for them specifically. "This wasn't random surveillance," Marcus said, examining the image over his brother's shoulder. "Someone knew we were coming here. They were positioned and ready with professional equipment." He pointed to details in the background. "Look at the depth of field, the clarity. This is military-grade reconnaissance photography." The manual from which the photograph had fallen contained technical specifications for communications equipment, with handwritten notes in the margins indicating modifications and security protocols. Several pages had been marked with yellow highlighter, emphasizing sections about encrypted transmissions and dead-drop procedures. Most unsettling were the recent pencil notations in a different handwriting than they'd seen elsewhere in the cabin. As they studied the photograph and manual, the sound of approaching engines reached them again. This time, however, the vehicles stopped much closer to the cabin, and the voices carried clearly through the morning air. The brothers positioned themselves at different windows, maintaining visual contact while gathering intelligence about their unwelcome visitors. Thermal imaging confirms the structure has been occupied recently, a woman's voice reported through radio static. Heat signatures in the main room and basement area. Someone's been using the fireplace and cooking facilities. A male voice responded with authority that suggested command responsibility. Proceed with standard search protocols. Document everything but maintain operational security. If the targets have accessed the cache materials, we need to know immediately. Daniel felt his blood chill at the word targets. These weren't law enforcement officers investigating a potential crime. They were military or intelligence operatives conducting a mission that included Marcus and himself as specific objectives. The implications transformed their situation from curiosity about the cabin's previous occupant to immediate personal danger. The search team moved with practiced efficiency through the valley, checking the same locations the brothers had explored, but with equipment that revealed details invisible to casual observation. Handheld devices detected recent human activity, while sophisticated cameras documented everything from footprint patterns to disturbed vegetation. "Subjects have been here for approximately 72 hours, the female operative reported. "Evidence suggests systematic exploration of the structure and surrounding area. No signs of hasty departure or awareness of surveillance." Marcus signaled Daniel to remain silent as the team approached the cabin itself. Through carefully positioned mirrors, they watched armed figures examine the exterior with instruments that could detect recent contact with surfaces. The level of technology and coordination confirmed their worst fears about the nature of the attention they'd attracted. Interior sweep confirms recent Habitation, came another voice through the radio chatter. Personal effects consistent with long-term hiking gear. Two individuals, likely male, based on clothing sizes and equipment choices. The team leader's response carried implications that made both brothers understand the gravity of their situation. Maintain perimeter security while technical team processes the site. If subjects return, we proceed with contingency protocols. No civilian contact without authorization. From their concealed positions, the brothers watched the operatives work with methodical precision. They photographed everything, collected samples from surfaces the brothers had touched, and deployed listening devices in locations that would monitor future activity. Most disturbing was their familiarity with the cabin's layout, suggesting previous surveillance or detailed intelligence briefings. When the team finally departed, after nearly 3 hours of intensive investigation, they left behind a valley that felt fundamentally changed. The sanctuary that had offered peace and belonging now felt exposed and dangerous. Every shadow could conceal observation equipment. Every sound could signal the return of hostile surveillance. The photograph remained on the table between them, its implications growing more ominous with each examination. Someone had known they would find this place and had been prepared to document their arrival. The question was whether their presence here was coincidence, destiny, or something far more calculated and dangerous. "We're not just trespassers anymore," Marcus said quietly. "We're part of whatever operation this cabin represents. The only question is whether we're assets or targets." Daniel nodded, understanding that their simple search for belonging had entangled them in something that powerful people were willing to use lethal force to control. The coded military correspondence lay scattered across the cabin's main table like pieces of a puzzle that had waited decades for the right minds to solve it. Daniel's artistic training had given him an eye for patterns that Marcus's tactical mindset complemented perfectly. Together they began to decipher the careful shorthand and numerical sequences that filled page after page of yellowed documents. The letters were addressed to someone identified only as Sanctuary, written in a mixture of military jargon and personal code that suggested deep familiarity between correspondents. Dates ranged from 1987 to 1991, covering a period that Daniel calculated would have coincided with major geopolitical shifts in global intelligence operations. The letterhead was absent from most documents, but watermarks visible when held to lamplight revealed government seals that had been deliberately obscured. "Look at this sequence," Daniel said, pointing to a series of numbers that appeared repeatedly throughout different letters. "It's not a standard military designation. Too personal, too irregular." He'd been working with the documents for hours, applying the same methodical approach he used when analyzing the composition of a complex landscape. Painting, Marcus studied the sequence with the systematic approach of someone trained to read tactical communications. "It's not coordinates either. Wrong format for geographical references." He paused, something nagging at his memory. "Wait, these numbers. They're familiar somehow." The breakthrough came when Marcus realized the sequences matched birth dates, not in standard format, but encoded with a simple cipher that reversed the order and added constant values. When applied consistently, the pattern revealed dates that made both brothers stop breathing, their own birth dates, along with a third date that fell between them. "Operation Sanctuary," Marcus read from one of the clearer documents. "Primary assets relocated to secure environment pending resolution of congressional oversight complications. Genetic verification confirms patrilineal connection. Subjects demonstrate inherited aptitudes consistent with operational requirements." Daniel felt the world shift beneath him as he processed the implications. Genetic verification, patrilineal connection. They're talking about family relationships, about inherited traits that make people suitable for specific types of work. The documents painted a picture of a covert operation that had involved families rather than individual agents. References to bloodline security and generational assets suggested a program that identified and cultivated operational capabilities through hereditary lines. Most disturbing were the clinical assessments of psychological profiles that matched traits both brothers recognized in themselves. Your father demonstrated exceptional aptitude for asymmetric warfare and extended isolation. Operations, one evaluation read. Psychological profile indicates strong protective instincts combined with strategic thinking capability. Recommend genetic line preservation for future operational requirements. Marcus set down the document with hands that trembled slightly. Our father. They're talking about our father as if he was some kind of specialized operative, as if we were bred for specific capabilities. The correspondence revealed a program that had operated in the shadows of legitimate military structure, identifying families with particular combinations of intelligence, physical capability, and psychological resilience. Children from these families were monitored from birth, their development tracked, and their eventual recruitment anticipated for operations, requiring long-term deep cover work. Sanctuary, terminated due to operational compromise. Read one of the final letters. Primary asset extracted under emergency protocols. Secondary assets relocated to civilian environment with manufactured background stories. Monitoring protocols remain active, pending future activation requirements. Daniel understood the implications before Marcus spoke them aloud. We were the secondary assets. Our entire childhood was a cover story designed to keep us available for future use. Our adoptive mother, our life, everything we thought we knew about our origin. The pattern became clearer as they worked through more documents. Their father had been a deep cover operative whose primary mission involved establishing and maintaining safe houses like the cabin they now occupied. When his operation was compromised, he'd been extracted while his children were placed in protective custody, disguised as adoption. The monitoring had continued throughout their childhood, waiting for the moment when their inherited capabilities might be needed. That's why we could survive 3 years on the trail, Marcus realized. Why we adapted so quickly to wilderness living. Why this place feels familiar. We were genetically selected for exactly these capabilities. The most disturbing revelation came in the form of activation protocols that remained valid despite the program's official termination. Under specific circumstances, assets could be recalled to active duty regardless of their civilian status or personal wishes. The circumstances were vague, but included national security emergencies and operational necessity determinations that gave broad discretionary authority to program administrators. They've been watching us our entire lives, Daniel said quietly, waiting to see if we'd develop the same capabilities our father demonstrated. Our wandering, our search for something we couldn't name, even finding this place. It was all anticipated. The correspondence suggested that their arrival at the cabin wasn't coincidence, but the result of psychological conditioning that had guided their choices from childhood. They'd been steered toward this moment through subtle influences that had shaped their decisions while maintaining the illusion of free will. Marcus studied the activation protocols with growing dread, understanding that their discovery of these documents might itself trigger the circumstances that would bring them back under program control. The faded photograph of townspeople that Marcus discovered tucked inside an old almanac made both brothers question everything they thought they understood about coincidence. The image, dated 1985, showed a group of residents gathered for what appeared to be a town celebration. Among the faces in the crowd, 2 bore such striking resemblance to Marcus and Daniel that they could have been looking at pictures of themselves taken in another era. The photograph was mounted on cardboard backing with careful handwriting identifying the location as Millfield Township Summer Festival and listing names of participants along the bottom margin. The 2 familiar faces belonged to individuals identified as Thomas Brennan and Michael Brennan, listed among the local business owners who had sponsored the event. The resemblance went beyond general family traits to specific features. Marcus recognized his own jawline and eye shape in Thomas, while Daniel saw his artistic hands and contemplative expression reflected in Michael. "We need to go to this town," Daniel said, studying the photograph under lamplight. "If these are relatives, if there's a family connection we don't know about. The people there might have answers about our father's real identity." Marcus felt his protective instincts warring with curiosity. Leaving the relative safety of the cabin meant exposing themselves to whatever surveillance networks were tracking their movements. But the photograph represented their first concrete lead to understanding their family history beyond them. Clinical assessments in the military correspondence, the drive to Millfield Township took them through mountain roads that showed signs of recent government vehicle traffic. Fresh tire tracks in soft shoulder dirt matched the tread patterns they'd observed during the federal agents' visits to their valley. Marcus maintained careful watch for surveillance, while Daniel navigated using back roads marked on their discovered topographical map. Millfield proved to be one of those small mountain communities that time had largely forgotten. Main Street consisted of a general store, a diner, a post office, and a few other businesses that served the needs of loggers, ranchers, and the occasional tourist. The buildings showed their age, but maintained the dignity of structures, built to last rather than impress. The conversation with the elderly woman behind the counter at Miller's General Store began, casually enough. Marcus mentioned they were researching family history, while Daniel browsed the selection of local newspapers and historical materials displayed near the register. When he showed her the photograph, however, her demeanor changed noticeably. "Where did you get this picture?" she asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She glanced toward the front windows, as if checking for observers, before focusing her attention back on the image. "Nobody's asked about the Brennan boys in more than 20 years. The story she told them, spoken in careful fragments with frequent pauses to ensure they weren't being overheard, revealed a family tragedy that had been deliberately obscured by official explanations. Thomas and Michael Brennan had been local sons who'd left for military service in the early 1980s and returned changed men. They'd established a wilderness outfitting business that served as cover for activities the townspeople understood they weren't supposed to discuss. "They were good boys," the woman said, her hands trembling slightly as she handled the photograph. "But whatever they got involved in, it wasn't safe work. People would come through town asking questions, government types who made it clear that talking about the Brennans wasn't in anyone's best interest." Daniel felt a chill of recognition as she described the brothers' disappearance in 1991. According to official accounts, they'd been killed in a climbing accident while establishing a new route for their guide service. Their bodies were never recovered, and the investigation was handled by federal authorities who sealed the case files and discouraged local involvement. "But climbers don't just vanish like that," she continued, glancing again toward the windows. "Not boys who knew these mountains like their own backyard. Something happened to them, something that required official silence and carefully managed explanations." The librarian at the small public library proved even more nervous when approached about local history involving the Brennan family. She directed them to a collection of newspaper archives, but watched anxiously as they researched, eventually approaching to suggest they might be more comfortable reviewing the materials elsewhere. "Some subjects attract attention," she said quietly. "The kind of attention that small communities can't afford. If you're connected to what happened back then, you need to understand that people here remember what it costs to ask too many questions." The newspaper archives revealed a pattern of coverage that had been carefully sanitized. Initial reports of the Brennan brothers' disappearance included details about their military backgrounds and their specialized wilderness training. Later editions showed increasing vagueness about the circumstances, and follow-up stories were conspicuously absent. Most telling was a small obituary that appeared 6 months after the supposed climbing accident. It mentioned surviving family members, including twin nephews placed in protective custody following the tragic loss of their guardians. The dates and details match perfectly with Marcus and Daniel's adoption timeline. As they prepared to leave Millfield, both brothers understood that their visit had likely been noted and reported to the same networks that monitored the cabin. But they'd gained confirmation of their family, connection and evidence that their father's work had involved his brothers in operations dangerous enough to require their elimination and their children's relocation. The photograph of their uncles remained their only tangible connection to a family history that had been systematically erased to protect operational security. The encrypted hard drive that Daniel discovered hidden inside a hollowed-out technical manual required every skill he'd developed during his brief stint studying computer science before their nomadic life began. The device was military specification, designed to withstand physical damage and unauthorized access attempts. Its external casing bore no identifying marks except for a small serial number that had been partially filed away. Daniel's artistic patience served him well as he worked through the encryption protocols. The password protection used a combination of military terminology and personal references that gradually yielded to systematic analysis. His breakthrough came when he realized the passwords incorporated family names and dates in the same cipher pattern they'd identified in the written correspondence. The files contained within the drive revealed the full scope of Operation Sanctuary and the fate of their father and uncles. Video testimonies, recorded during what appeared to be the program's final months, showed their father speaking directly to the camera with the weary resignation of someone preparing for an uncertain future. "If you're watching this recording," their father said, his voice carrying the same cadence and inflection that Marcus heard in his own speech patterns, "then the protocols have been activated and you've found your way to the sanctuary. My name is David Brennan, and everything you've been told about your family history has been carefully constructed to protect you from the consequences of my choices." The resemblance was unmistakable. David Brennan possessed Marcus's tactical awareness and Daniel's contemplative intelligence, combined in a way that suggested where both brothers had inherited their complementary capabilities. His military bearing was evident even in the informal setting of what appeared to be the cabin's main room, recorded by the same lighting that now illuminated their own discoveries. Operation Sanctuary was designed to create and maintain deep cover assets for extended wilderness operations. David continued in the recording. "We were tasked with establishing safe houses, monitoring foreign intelligence activities in remote areas, and providing extraction routes for compromised operatives. The work required families willing to live in isolation for years at a time, maintaining cover identities while conducting surveillance and support operations." The video revealed that their father and uncles had volunteered for the program after conventional military service, drawn by the promise of meaningful work and the ability to serve their country while living according to their own values. What they hadn't anticipated was the program's gradual shift from legitimate intelligence work to operations that violated both military protocols and constitutional law. By 1990, we were being asked to monitor American citizens, to gather intelligence on domestic political activities, and to maintain safe houses for operations that had no legal authorization, David explained, his expression growing darker as he described the program's corruption. "When we refused to participate in unconstitutional surveillance of civilian targets, we became liabilities rather than assets." Daniel felt his world shifting as he processed the implications of his father's testimony. The program that had created their family had ultimately destroyed it when David and his brothers developed ethical objections to its evolution. Their father's integrity had cost him his life, and his children their true identity. The most devastating revelation came in David's final video entry, recorded just days before his disappearance. His face showed the strain of someone living under constant threat, and his words carried the weight of a man preparing for sacrifice. Congressional oversight was getting too close to exposing the illegal operations, he said, glancing occasionally toward the windows as if expecting immediate danger. The program administrators decided that elimination of primary assets was preferable to exposure. Thomas and Michael have already been targeted. I've arranged for the boys to be placed in protective custody with manufactured identities. They'll be safer growing up believing I abandoned them than knowing the truth about why I had to disappear. The recording included specific instructions for accessing additional evidence cached throughout the Wilderness Network, along with protocols for contacting other survivors of the program who had managed to escape elimination. Most importantly, it contained detailed documentation of the illegal operations that had led to the program's termination and the systematic elimination of operatives who possessed compromising knowledge. The encryption on this drive is designed to activate only when accessed by genetic matches to my DNA profile, David explained. If you're watching this, you're my sons, and you have the right to know the truth about your heritage and your father's fate. But understanding the truth also means accepting the responsibility that comes with this knowledge. Daniel realized that their discovery of the cabin and the drive's contents wasn't coincidence, but the activation of protocols their father had established decades earlier. Their genetic profiles, their inherited capabilities, and their psychological development had all been factors in a plan designed to eventually lead them to this moment of truth. The video concluded with their father's final message, delivered with the composed dignity of someone facing an uncertain but likely fatal future. You were born into a legacy of service and sacrifice, he said, looking directly into the camera as if he could see across the years to address them personally. What you do with that legacy, how you choose to honor or reject the responsibilities it represents, will define not just your own futures, but the possibility of justice for those who died protecting constitutional principles they believed in. The hard drive contained terabytes of additional evidence, including communications that implicated current government officials in the cover-up of Operation Sanctuary's illegal activities. Daniel understood that they now possessed information that powerful people would kill to suppress. The birth certificates with altered information lay spread across the cabin table, like evidence of a carefully orchestrated deception that had shaped their entire lives. Daniel discovered them sealed in a waterproof envelope hidden behind a false back panel in one of the cabin's built-in storage compartments. The documents bore official state seals and signatures, but close examination revealed subtle inconsistencies that marked them as sophisticated forgeries, their original birth. Certificates listed David Brennan as their father and a woman named Sarah Brennan as their mother, with birth dates that matched the encoded sequences they'd found in the military correspondence. The altered versions, which had governed their legal identities throughout childhood, showed different parents entirely, and birth dates shifted by several months to obscure their connection to the Brennan family timeline. Marcus studied the documents with the systematic attention he applied to tactical intelligence. Look at the paper stock, he said, holding one certificate to the lamplight. The original uses security paper with embedded watermarks. The forgery is good, professional quality, but it's printed on different material. The implication struck Daniel with devastating clarity. Their adoptive mother, whom they'd loved and trusted throughout their childhood, had been an active participant in maintaining their false identities. Every birthday celebration, every school enrollment, every official document had been based on carefully constructed lies designed to erase their connection to their father's fate. The confrontation with Eleanor Matthias, the woman they'd called mother for 30 years, took place over a secure phone connection Daniel established using the cabin's restored communication equipment. Her voice, when she answered, carried the weight of someone who had been expecting this call for decades. "You found the cabin," she said without preamble, her tone mixing relief with resignation. I always knew you would eventually. David programmed you both too well for simple lives to satisfy you permanently. Daniel felt his carefully constructed understanding of family and love crumbling as Eleanor confirmed their worst suspicions. Everything was a lie, he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. Our names, our birthdays, our entire childhood history. You helped them erase our father from our lives. I helped them keep you alive, Eleanor replied with quiet firmness. Do you think David wanted his sons to grow up believing he'd abandoned them? Do you think I enjoyed lying to children who deserve the truth about their heritage? Every birthday party, every school play, every moment of your childhood carried the weight of knowing I was deceiving the boys I'd come to love as my own sons. Marcus took the phone, his military training helping him maintain operational focus despite the emotional turmoil. What was your role in the program? How long have you been reporting on our activities? The silence stretched long enough that both brothers wondered if the connection had been severed. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice carried 3 decades of accumulated grief and guilt. I was David's communications specialist before I became your guardian, she admitted. My assignment was to monitor your development, to report on psychological markers that might indicate inherited operational capabilities, and to ensure you remained available for potential activation if circumstances required it. Daniel felt betrayed in ways that went beyond simple deception. You were spying on us, reporting on our conversations, our interests, our relationships. Everything we shared with you was intelligence data for people who saw us as assets rather than children. Initially, yes, Eleanor said. But somewhere between your first steps and your first day of school, you stopped being subjects and became my sons. He continued filing reports, but I sanitized them to protect you from premature recruitment. I delayed psychological evaluations, misrepresented test results, and generally sabotaged my own mission to give you as normal a childhood as possible. The revelation that their adoptive mother had eventually turned protector rather than handler provided some comfort, but it couldn't erase the fundamental deception that had governed their lives. Marcus pressed for tactical intelligence, while Daniel struggled with the emotional implications of learning that even parental love had been compromised by operational necessities. The people watching us now, Marcus said, are they the same ones who eliminated our father and uncles? Eleanor's response carried warnings that made both brothers understand the immediate danger of their situation. Some of them, yes. The program officially ended, but the people who authorized its illegal activities are still in positions of power. Your discovery of David's evidence represents an existential threat to their careers and their freedom. She provided them with specific names and current positions of officials who had been involved in Operation Sanctuary's corruption and subsequent cover-up. Several held senior positions in current intelligence agencies, while others had moved into private sector roles that gave them continued access to government resources. Your father prepared for this possibility, Eleanor continued. There are protocols for exposing the truth, but implementing them will make you permanent targets. The evidence you've found is sufficient to destroy careers and potentially result in criminal prosecutions, but only if you can survive long enough to make it public. The call ended with Eleanor's final warning about the sophistication of the surveillance, networks tracking their activities, and her promise to provide what assistance she could while maintaining her own security. Both brothers understood that they could no longer trust anyone completely, including the woman who had raised them with genuine love, despite her compromised loyalties. The GPS tracking device that Marcus discovered, sewn into the inner lining of Daniel's hiking pack, was no larger than a silver dollar, but its implications transformed their understanding of the past 3 years. The device was military specification, designed for long-term surveillance with battery life measured in years rather than months. Its discovery meant that every step of their supposed journey of self-discovery had been monitored and potentially guided by handlers who saw them as assets to be managed, rather than individuals seeking freedom. Daniel felt physically sick as he examined the device under magnification. The stitching that concealed it had been done with professional skill, invisible to casual inspection, but accessible to anyone who knew its location. "They've known where we were every single day," he said, his voice hollow with the realization. "Every trail, every campsite, every decision we thought was ours." Marcus's military training kicked in as he processed the tactical implications. This explains the federal response time when we found the cabin. They didn't need to search for us because they already knew our exact location. The surveillance teams, the searches, even our discovery of the cabin itself might have been orchestrated. The device's technical specifications, which Marcus decoded using manuals from the cabin's communication equipment, revealed capabilities that went beyond simple location tracking. It could monitor ambient conversations, detect stress indicators through biometric analysis, and transmit real-time data to handlers who could respond to behavioral changes within hours. "We've been living in a laboratory," Daniel realized, his artistic mind recoiling from the systematic violation of privacy and autonomy. Our wandering, our search for meaning, our decision to live off the grid. All of it was performance data for people studying whether we'd developed the same operational capabilities as our father. The implications extended beyond surveillance to active manipulation. Marcus found evidence in the cabin's communication logs that their path had been subtly influenced through planted information, closed trails that forced them towards specific routes, and even engineered encounters with people who steered their conversations toward topics that would reveal psychological markers. "Look at this," Marcus said, showing Daniel a series of radio intercepts that detailed their movements over the past year. Every major decision we made, every change in direction, every time we chose to stay somewhere longer than planned. It's all documented with analysis of what it revealed about our psychological profiles and operational potential. The surveillance network that had monitored them extended far beyond simple electronic tracking. Daniel realized that people they'd encountered throughout their journey, individuals they'd trusted enough to share meals and stories, had likely been reporting on their conversations and behavior. The loneliness and isolation they'd felt during their wandering years had been artificially maintained to keep them psychologically available for eventual recruitment. "The old man at the trail junction in Colorado," Daniel said, memory flooding back. "He asked too many questions about our family background, our reasons for hiking. I thought he was just lonely and curious, but he was conducting an interview." Marcus nodded grimly. "And the woman at the supply store in Wyoming, who recommended we avoid certain trails because of weather conditions. She steered us toward the route that would eventually lead us here. The discovery forced them to re-examine every interaction, every decision, every moment of their supposed freedom. Their 3 years of wandering had been an extended psychological evaluation, designed to determine whether they possessed the genetic and environmental factors that had made their father valuable to covert operations. Most disturbing was the realization that their emotional states had been monitored and potentially manipulated. The device could detect stress hormones, sleep patterns, and conversation patterns that revealed their psychological condition. Handlers had access to real-time data about their mental health, their relationship dynamics, and their susceptibility to recruitment approaches. "They knew we were ready to find this place," Marcus said, studying the behavioral analysis reports. "The timing of our discovery wasn't coincidence. They guided us here when psychological profiles indicated we were prepared to accept the truth about our heritage." Daniel felt the weight of manufactured destiny crushing his sense of personal agency. "Our entire adult lives have been a manipulation designed to bring us to this moment. We thought we were choosing freedom, but we were following a script written before we were old enough to read." The tracking device represented more than surveillance. It was evidence of a systematic program to control their development and ultimately recruit them for operations that required their specific genetic and psychological profile. Their handlers had invested years in preparing them for activation, using their search for identity and belonging as tools to ensure compliance. "We have to assume everything is compromised," Marcus said, beginning to plan their response to the revelation. "Our communication, our location, our intentions, they know we've discovered the truth, and they'll respond accordingly." The device had served its purpose by leading them to the cabin and the evidence their father had prepared. Now it represented the electronic leash that would guide their handlers' efforts to either recruit or eliminate them before they could expose the illegal activities that had destroyed their family. Daniel carefully disabled the device using techniques from the technical manuals, understanding that this action would trigger immediate response protocols from handlers who had monitored them for years. The dead drop communication system that Daniel discovered behind a loose stone in the cabin's foundation consisted of a weatherproof container holding messages from other survivors of Operation Sanctuary. The container's placement required intimate knowledge of the cabin's construction, suggesting it had been established by their father or someone with equivalent access to the site's tactical features. The messages, written on waterproof paper in a variety of handwriting styles, revealed a network of families who had managed to survive the program's termination and subsequent elimination efforts. Each note was signed with cryptic initials and included coded references to locations and contact protocols that spoke of years spent perfecting clandestine communication. Methods: Phoenix Network remains active, despite official termination. Read one message dated just 6 months earlier. Assets in position throughout Western operational zones. Awaiting activation signal from primary sanctuary. Contact protocols remain valid for genetic verification procedures. Marcus recognized the military communication style immediately, but the personal touches in each message revealed the human cost of the program's collapse. These weren't just former operatives maintaining professional networks. They were families who had lost everything and spent decades living in fear of discovery and elimination. Daniel was struck by the artistic precision with which the communication system had been designed. Each message included subtle visual markers that confirmed authenticity, while disguising the documents as ordinary wilderness notes if discovered by casual hikers. The code systems used multiple layers of encryption that would be virtually impossible to break without specific knowledge of family histories and personal details. Known only to program survivors. "We're not alone," Daniel said, studying a message that included references to inherited obligations and generational responsibilities. "There are others who've been carrying the same burden, waiting for someone to take action against the people who destroyed the program." The network had been monitoring government activities related to Operation Sanctuary's cover-up, tracking the careers and positions of officials who had been involved in authorizing illegal domestic surveillance. Several messages included intelligence about current operations that suggested the same people were still engaged in constitutional violations under different program names and administrative structures. They never stopped, Marcus realized, reading a detailed analysis of current intelligence operations that mirrored the illegal activities that had led to their father's elimination. They just changed the names and moved the operations to different agencies. The same people are still conducting unauthorized surveillance on American citizens. Contact with the network required following protocols their father had established for emergency activation. Daniel used the cabin's restored communication equipment to transmit coded signals that would identify them as David Brennan's sons and confirm their access to the evidence cache he had prepared. The response came within hours, confirming that the network had been waiting decades for this contact. The first ally to make direct contact was a woman who identified herself only as Raven 6, using call signs that indicated her position. In the original program structure, her transmission carried the authority. of someone who had served as a senior operative and had spent years building resistance networks among program survivors. Your father's final protocols are now active, she transmitted. Secondary assets confirmed as operational. Primary mission parameters remain valid. Exposure of illegal activities and prosecution of responsible officials. Support network stands ready for coordination. Daniel felt the weight of inherited responsibility settling over him as he realized the scope of what their father had planned. The evidence cache, the cabin, even their genetic conditioning had been elements in a long-term strategy to eventually expose the truth about Operation Sanctuary's corruption and the systematic elimination of operatives who had developed ethical objections. The network provided them with current intelligence about the officials tracking their activities, including detailed profiles of the people who had ordered their father's assassination and continued to monitor their development. Several held senior positions in agencies that gave them access to significant resources and the authority to authorize elimination operations against perceived threats. Immediate extraction available if required, Raven 6 transmitted. However, optimal outcome requires completion of exposure protocols while maintaining operational security. Your genetic profiles and inherited capabilities make you uniquely qualified for penetration operations against current illegal surveillance networks. Marcus understood that they were being recruited not just as assets, but as the central figures in a complex operation to expose corruption that reached the highest levels of intelligence agencies. Their inherited capabilities, their access to compromising evidence, and their motivation for justice made them ideal candidates to infiltrate and document current illegal activities. The network had spent years positioning assets throughout government agencies, gathering evidence of ongoing constitutional violations, and preparing for the moment when David Brennan's sons would be ready to serve as the focal point for a comprehensive exposure operation. Their father's sacrifice had been designed to create this opportunity for justice, training protocols available for advanced skill development, another network member transmitted. Your genetic profiles indicate exceptional potential for extended deep cover operations. Recommend immediate commencement of specialized preparation. For mission requirements, Daniel realized that accepting the network's support would mean embracing the legacy their father had prepared for them, transforming from victims of governmental manipulation into active agents working to expose and prosecute the people responsible for decades of illegal activities. The choice represented not just personal justice, but the possibility of preventing future families from experiencing the systematic destruction that had defined their lives. The dead drop system represented more than communication. It was evidence of a resistance movement that had survived decades of persecution while maintaining the operational capabilities necessary to challenge powerful adversaries who believed themselves beyond accountability. The recording device, with damning evidence that Daniel discovered, hidden inside Eleanor's own communication equipment, revealed a betrayal so complex that it redefined their understanding of loyalty, survival, and love. The device, no larger than a hearing aid battery, had been recording conversations in Eleanor's home for over a decade, capturing her reports to handlers alongside her genuine expressions of maternal affection for the boys she'd raised. The recordings painted a picture of a woman caught between conflicting loyalties, forced to choose between operational obligations and the welfare of children who had become her sons in every way except biology. Her early reports were clinical and professional, documenting psychological development markers and behavioral indicators that handlers used to assess the brothers' potential for eventual recruitment. Subjects demonstrate exceptional adaptive capabilities. Eleanor's voice reported in one early recording. Marcus shows natural leadership tendencies and tactical awareness beyond age-appropriate norms. Daniel displays artistic intelligence combined with analytical precision. Both exhibit inherited stress tolerance and group cohesion capabilities consistent with operational requirements. But as the recordings progressed through years of the brothers' childhood, Eleanor's tone shifted from professional assessment to protective advocacy. Daniel heard her arguing with handlers about psychological pressures being placed on developing minds, challenging evaluation protocols that she believed were damaging their emotional growth, and eventually refusing direct orders to implement more intensive monitoring procedures. "These are children, not experimental subjects," her voice said in a recording from their early teenage years. "The behavioral modifications you're requesting would constitute psychological abuse. I won't participate in traumatizing boys who've already lost their father to this program's excesses." Marcus listened with growing amazement as Eleanor's reports gradually transformed from intelligence gathering to active protection. She had been deliberately misrepresenting test results, understating their capabilities, and creating false documentation to delay their recruitment and extend their period of normal childhood development. The most revealing recordings captured Eleanor's conversations with other program handlers, including heated arguments about the ethics of generational recruitment and the constitutional violations inherent in monitoring American citizens without judicial oversight. The device had served its purpose by leading them to the cabin and the evidence their father had prepared. Now it represented the electronic leash that would guide their handlers' efforts to either recruit or eliminate them before they could expose the illegal activities that had destroyed their family. Daniel carefully disabled the device using techniques from the technical manuals, understanding that this action would trigger immediate response protocols from handlers who had monitored them for years. The dead drop communication system that Daniel discovered behind a loose stone in the cabin's foundation consisted of a weatherproof container holding messages from other survivors of Operation Sanctuary. The container's placement required intimate knowledge of the cabin's construction, suggesting it had been established by their father or someone with equivalent access to the site's tactical features. The messages, written on waterproof paper in a variety of handwriting styles, revealed a network of families who had managed to survive the program's termination and subsequent elimination efforts. Each note was signed with cryptic initials and included coded references to locations and contact protocols that spoke of years spent perfecting clandestine communication methods. Phoenix Network remains active. Despite official termination, read one message dated just 6 months earlier. Assets in position throughout Western operational zones, awaiting activation signal from primary sanctuary. Contact protocols remain valid for genetic verification procedures. Marcus recognized the military communication style immediately, but the personal touches in each message revealed the human cost of the program's collapse. These weren't just former operatives maintaining professional networks. They were families who had lost everything and spent decades living in fear of discovery and elimination. Daniel was struck by the artistic precision with which the communication system had been designed. Each message included subtle visual markers that confirmed authenticity while disguising the documents as ordinary wilderness notes if discovered by casual hikers. The code systems used multiple layers of encryption that would be virtually impossible to break without specific knowledge of family histories and personal details, known only to program survivors. "We're not alone," Daniel said, studying a message that included references to inherited obligations and generational responsibilities. "There are others who've been carrying the same burden, waiting for someone to take action against the people who destroyed the program." The network had been monitoring government activities related to Operation Sanctuary's cover-up, tracking the careers and positions of officials who had been involved in authorizing illegal domestic surveillance. Several messages included intelligence about current operations that suggested the same people were still engaged in constitutional violations under different program names and administrative structures. They never stopped, Marcus realized. reading a detailed analysis of current intelligence operations that mirrored the illegal activities that had led to their father's elimination. They just changed the names and moved the operations to different agencies. The same people are still conducting unauthorized surveillance on American citizens. Contact with the network required following protocols their father had established for emergency activation. Daniel used the cabin's restored communication equipment to transmit coded signals that would identify them as David Brennan's sons and confirm their access to the evidence cache he had prepared. The response came within hours, confirming that the network had been waiting decades for this contact. The first ally to make direct contact was a woman who identified herself only as Raven 6, using call signs that indicated her position in the original program structure. Her transmission carried the authority of someone who had served as a senior operative and had spent years building resistance networks among program survivors. Your father's final protocols are now active, she transmitted. Secondary assets confirmed as operational. Primary mission parameters remain valid. Exposure of illegal activities and prosecution of responsible officials. Support network stands ready for coordination. Daniel felt the weight of inherited responsibility settling over him as he realized the scope of what their father had planned. The evidence cache, the cabin, even their genetic conditioning had been elements in a long-term strategy to eventually expose the truth about Operation Sanctuary's corruption and the systematic elimination of operatives who had developed ethical objections. The network provided them with current intelligence about the officials tracking their activities, including detailed profiles of the people who had ordered their father's assassination and continued to monitor their development. Several held senior positions in agencies that gave them access to significant resources and the authority to authorize elimination operations against perceived threats. Immediate extraction available if required, Raven 6 transmitted. However, optimal outcome requires completion of exposure protocols while maintaining operational security. Your genetic profiles and inherited capabilities make you uniquely qualified for penetration operations against current illegal surveillance networks. Marcus understood that they were being recruited not just as assets, but as the central figures in a complex operation to expose corruption that reached the highest levels of intelligence agencies. Their inherited capabilities, their access to compromising evidence, and their motivation for justice made them ideal candidates to infiltrate and document current illegal activities. The network had spent years positioning assets throughout government agencies, gathering evidence of ongoing constitutional violations, and preparing for the moment when David Brennan's sons would be ready to serve as the focal point for a comprehensive exposure operation. Their father's sacrifice had been designed to create this opportunity for justice. Training protocols available for advanced skill development, another network member transmitted. Your genetic profiles indicate exceptional potential for extended deep cover operations. Recommend immediate commencement of specialized preparation for mission requirements. Daniel realized that accepting the network's support would mean embracing the legacy their father had prepared for them, transforming from victims of governmental manipulation into active agents working to expose and prosecute the people responsible for decades of illegal activities. The choice represented not just personal justice, but the possibility of preventing future families from experiencing the systematic destruction that had defined their lives. The dead drop system represented more than communication. It was evidence of a resistance movement that had survived decades of persecution while maintaining the operational capabilities necessary to challenge powerful adversaries who believed themselves beyond accountability. The recording device, with damning evidence that Daniel discovered, hidden inside Eleanor's own communication equipment, revealed a betrayal so complex that it redefined their understanding of loyalty, survival, and love. The device, no larger than a hearing aid battery, had been recording conversations in Eleanor's home for over a decade, capturing her reports to handlers alongside her genuine expressions of maternal affection for the boys she'd raised. The recordings painted a picture of a woman caught between conflicting loyalties, forced to choose between operational obligations and the welfare of children who had become her sons, in every way except biology. Her early reports were clinical and professional, documenting psychological, development markers and behavioral indicators that handlers used to assess the brothers' potential for eventual recruitment. Subjects demonstrate exceptional adaptive capabilities. Eleanor's voice reported in one early recording. Marcus shows natural leadership tendencies and tactical awareness beyond age-appropriate norms. Daniel displays artistic intelligence combined with analytical precision. Both exhibit inherited stress tolerance and group cohesion capabilities consistent with operational requirements. But as the recordings progressed, through years of the brothers' childhood, Eleanor's tone shifted from professional assessment to protective advocacy. Daniel heard her arguing with handlers about psychological pressures being placed on developing minds, challenging evaluation protocols that she believed were damaging their emotional growth, and eventually refusing direct orders to implement more intensive monitoring procedures. "These are children, not experimental subjects," her voice said in a recording from their early teenage years. "The behavioral modifications you're requesting would constitute psychological abuse. I won't participate in traumatizing boys who've already lost their father to this program's excesses." Marcus listened with growing amazement as Eleanor's reports gradually transformed from intelligence gathering to active protection. She had been deliberately misrepresenting test results, understating their capabilities, and creating false documentation to delay their recruitment and extend their period of normal childhood development. The most revealing recordings captured Eleanor's conversations with other program handlers, including heated arguments about the ethics of generational recruitment and the constitutional violations inherent in monitoring American citizens without judicial oversight. Her objections had been noted and reported, marking her as a potential security risk within the very program she had once served faithfully. The original mission parameters included constitutional protections and judicial oversight. Eleanor argued in one particularly intense exchange. "What we're doing now violates every principle that justified the program's existence. We've become exactly the kind of domestic surveillance apparatus that the Constitution was designed to prevent." Daniel felt his understanding of family relationships shifting as he processed the complexity of Eleanor's position. She had genuinely loved them while simultaneously serving as their primary handler, protecting them from program excesses while maintaining enough cooperation to avoid being eliminated herself. Her betrayal was also her greatest act of maternal protection. The recordings revealed that Eleanor's handlers had grown increasingly suspicious of her loyalty as the brothers approached adulthood. Plans had been developed to replace her with operatives who would be more aggressive about activating the brothers for recruitment into current illegal surveillance operations. Subject: handler shows signs of emotional compromise affecting operational judgment, one handler reported about Eleanor. Recommend immediate replacement with backup asset and implementation of accelerated activation protocols. Current handlers' protective instincts represent mission security. Risk: Marcus realized that Eleanor's decision to maintain their false identities and delay their discovery of the truth had been motivated not just by maternal love but by tactical intelligence about the fate that awaited them once their capabilities were fully assessed and documented. The final recordings captured Eleanor's preparation for the moment when the brothers would inevitably discover their true heritage. She had been secretly copying evidence, establishing communication protocols with the Phoenix network, and preparing contingency plans to support their escape if program handlers decided to eliminate them rather than risk exposure. If you're listening to this recording, Eleanor's voice said in her final message, addressed directly to Marcus and Daniel, "Then the protocols have been activated, and you've learned the truth about your father and your heritage. Everything I did, every lie I told, every report I filed was designed to keep you alive long enough to make your own choices. About the legacy you've inherited, the recording device represented Eleanor's final act of rebellion against the program that had controlled her life for decades. By preserving evidence of her handler's illegal activities and constitutional violations, she had provided the brothers with documentation that could expose the network of officials who continued to operate outside legal oversight. "I've loved you as my son since the day you arrived," Eleanor's voice concluded. "But I've also prepared you for the moment when you would have to choose whether to honor your father's sacrifice by completing his mission or reject the responsibilities that come with your genetic heritage. Whatever you decide, know that you'll always be my boys, regardless of the operational circumstances that brought us together." The device contained hours of additional evidence, documenting the systematic violations of constitutional rights that had characterized the program's evolution from legitimate intelligence work to domestic political surveillance. The government contract with personal signatures that Marcus discovered in a sealed compartment within the cabin's communication equipment revealed the true scope of the conspiracy and identified the man who had orchestrated their father's assassination. The document, bearing the official seal of a congressional oversight committee, authorized the termination of Operation Sanctuary and the administrative resolution of personnel who possessed compromising knowledge about illegal domestic surveillance activities. The signature at the bottom belonged to Congressman Robert Hawthorne, who had served on the House Intelligence Committee during the program's final years and was currently positioned as the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. His authorization had legitimized the systematic elimination of operatives who had developed ethical objections to constitutional violations, transforming murder into administrative policy. Daniel studied the document with growing horror as he recognized the clinical language that had condemned their father and uncles to death. Administrative resolution of non-compliant assets was bureaucratic terminology for assassination. Protective relocation of secondary assets referred to their childhood placement in foster care under false identities. The document treated human lives as administrative problems to be solved through carefully managed violence. "He's still in power," Marcus said, cross-referencing the signature with current government directories. Senator Robert Hawthorne, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, he's been overseeing intelligence operations for the past 5 years, which means he's been in position to monitor our activities and authorize current surveillance operations. The contract included detailed financial authorizations for the elimination operations, with specific funding allocations for cleanup, operations, and ongoing asset management. The amounts involved were significant enough to suggest a well-funded conspiracy that extended far beyond a single rogue program, indicating systematic corruption within intelligence oversight mechanisms. Daniel realized that Hawthorne's position gave him access to current intelligence resources and the authority to authorize elimination operations against perceived threats. Their discovery of the evidence cache and contact with the Phoenix network would have triggered alert protocols that informed him of their activities within hours of activation. "This explains the federal response teams," Marcus said, studying the authorization structures detailed in the contract. "Hawthorne has been using his oversight position to monitor and eliminate surviving Operation Sanctuary personnel. The agents who searched our valley were working under his direct authority." The document revealed that Hawthorne's motivation went beyond simple cover-up to active continuation of the illegal surveillance activities that had corrupted Operation Sanctuary. His committee position allowed him to authorize domestic surveillance operations that violated constitutional protections, using national security justifications to monitor American citizens without judicial oversight. He never stopped, Daniel realized, reading supplementary authorizations that extended the original program's objectives under different administrative designations. Operation Sanctuary officially ended, but he's been running the same illegal surveillance under new names and different funding streams. The contract included provisions for generational asset activation that specifically referenced Marcus and Daniel by their original identities. Hawthorne had been planning to recruit them for current operations, using their genetic capabilities and psychological conditioning to conduct surveillance operations against domestic political targets. "We're not just witnesses to past crimes," Marcus said, understanding the immediate danger of their situation. "We're designated assets for ongoing illegal operations. Hawthorne needs us either recruited or eliminated to maintain operational security for current constitutional violations." The documentation revealed the scope of Hawthorne's current activities, including unauthorized surveillance of political opponents, illegal monitoring of judicial communications, and systematic intimidation of journalists and activists who investigated intelligence agency overreach. His committee position provided legal cover for activities that violated every constitutional principle the intelligence agencies were supposed to protect. Daniel found evidence that Hawthorne had been using resources from multiple agencies to conduct personal political surveillance, gathering compromising information about congressional colleagues and judicial officials to maintain his position and protect his illegal activities from oversight or prosecution. He's been using intelligence resources for personal political gain, Daniel said, studying financial records that showed suspicious transfers between committee budgets and private contractor accounts. This isn't just about covering up past crimes. He's been actively corrupting current intelligence operations for personal benefit. The contract represented more than historical evidence. It was proof of ongoing criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of intelligence oversight. Hawthorne's signature on authorization documents for assassination and surveillance operations provided the legal foundation for prosecution if they could survive long enough to present the evidence to authorities not under his influence. "He knows we have this," Marcus said, recognizing the tactical implications of their discovery. "The moment we access this document, security protocols would have alerted him that the evidence cache had been activated. He'll respond with everything he has to prevent exposure." The brothers understood that they were no longer dealing with historical injustice, but active threat from someone who controlled significant intelligence resources and had already demonstrated willingness to authorize murder to protect his illegal activities. The tactical equipment cache that their father had hidden beneath the cabin's foundation contained enough military hardware to outfit a small special operations team. Marcus discovered the concealed entrance while examining structural damage from recent surveillance sweeps, finding a precisely engineered hiding space that had remained undetected through decades of professional searches. The cache represented David Brennan's final gift to his sons, the tools necessary to fight back against the forces that had destroyed their family. The equipment bore the hallmarks of professional military issue, but with modifications that spoke of years spent perfecting tools for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. Night vision systems had been upgraded with frequency-hopping capabilities to avoid electronic detection. Communication equipment used military encryption combined with civilian frequencies that would be difficult to monitor. Most significantly, the weapons were configured for precision operations that minimized collateral damage while maximizing effectiveness against armored and protected targets. Daniel studied the cache's organization with appreciation for his father's methodical preparation. Everything was vacuum-sealed and preserved with the attention to detail of someone who understood that equipment failure could mean death for the people depending on these resources. Instructions were included for each system, written in the same precise handwriting they'd found throughout the cabin, with tactical notes that revealed David Brennan's experience in unconventional warfare. This isn't defensive equipment, Marcus realized. Examining assault gear designed for offensive operations against hardened targets. Dad was preparing for war against people with access to government resources and professional security. He knew that exposure would require more than just evidence. It would require the capability to fight. The cache included detailed intelligence files on current and former government officials involved in Operation Sanctuary's illegal activities. Photographs, address information, security protocols, and personal schedules suggested years of surveillance and preparation for targeted operations against specific individuals. Most concerning was the comprehensive dossier on Senator Hawthorne that included his daily routines, security arrangements, and known vulnerabilities. Daniel found himself both impressed and disturbed by the scope of his father's preparations. He was planning assassinations, he said, studying operational plans that detailed approaches to eliminate key figures in the conspiracy, not just exposure or prosecution. He was preparing to personally execute the people responsible for destroying the program. The strategic planning documents revealed David Brennan's understanding that legal remedies would be insufficient against adversaries who controlled the oversight mechanisms designed to prevent exactly the kinds of constitutional violations they had committed. His solution involved systematic elimination of conspiracy leaders combined with public release of evidence that would prevent cover-up efforts. Marcus recognized the tactical genius of his father's approach while questioning its moral implications. He understood that these people are beyond legal accountability, he said, studying plans that accounted for judicial corruption and legislative capture. But implementing these plans would make us the same kind of extrajudicial killers that we're trying to stop. The equipment cache included resources for both lethal and non-lethal operations, suggesting that David had wrestled with the same moral questions that now confronted his sons. Options ranged from assassination equipment to sophisticated surveillance systems that could gather evidence of ongoing crimes without requiring violence. "Look at this," Daniel said, discovering a section of the cache dedicated to broadcasting and communication equipment designed for mass information distribution. He wasn't just planning to kill the conspirators. He was preparing to expose everything simultaneously, using multiple channels to ensure the information couldn't be suppressed. The broadcasting equipment was military specification, capable of overriding civilian communication networks and transmitting on emergency frequencies that would reach law enforcement, media and government officials simultaneously. Combined with the evidence they'd discovered, it represented the capability to expose the conspiracy to public scrutiny while providing protection against retaliation. Marcus began to understand his father's complete strategy as he studied the operational timelines and coordination requirements. It's not about revenge, he realized. It's about justice implemented through channels that can't be corrupted or suppressed. He was planning to create a situation where cover-up would be impossible and legal accountability would be forced through public pressure. The cache represented more than weapons and equipment. It was a comprehensive resistance infrastructure designed to challenge systemic corruption through methods that conventional legal processes couldn't provide. David Brennan had spent years developing the capability to hold powerful people accountable when constitutional mechanisms failed to function. Daniel felt the weight of inherited responsibility as he examined training materials, designed to bring him and Marcus up to operational capability within weeks rather than years. Their father had anticipated their psychological development and design preparation protocols that would leverage their existing capabilities while providing the specialized skills necessary for complex operations. We don't have to become killers. To honor his legacy, Daniel said, studying the non-lethal options within the comprehensive operational plans. But we do have to be willing to fight people who've already demonstrated they'll use lethal force to protect their illegal activities. The equipment cache provided them with choices their father had carefully prepared. The capability to seek justice through violence or through exposure, to operate as assassins or as resistance fighters, to honor their heritage through revenge or through restoration of constitutional principles. The intercepted communication orders that Daniel decoded, using the cabin's sophisticated monitoring equipment, provided final confirmation that Senator Hawthorne had authorized the elimination of all surviving Operation Sanctuary assets within 72 hours. The encrypted transmissions, captured from secure government frequencies, revealed the scope of the operation, designed to permanently silence everyone who possessed knowledge of the illegal surveillance programs. The orders were clinical in their precision, designating specific assets for administrative resolution, while authorizing the use of any necessary force to prevent exposure of sensitive materials. Marcus counted at least 15 families identified for elimination, including children who'd been born after the program's official termination, but who represented potential genetic assets for future operations. They're planning to kill entire bloodlines, Daniel said, his voice hollow with the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Not just the original operatives or their children, but grandchildren, spouses, anyone who might have access to family knowledge about the program. The communication intercepts revealed that Hawthorne had mobilized resources from multiple agencies, using his oversight authority to coordinate a systematic purge that would eliminate all evidence of the program's existence, along with everyone who could testify about its illegal activities. The operation was scheduled to begin within hours, using the cover of coordinated terrorist incidents to explain the simultaneous deaths of families across multiple states. Marcus studied the tactical deployments with professional assessment of their implications. This isn't just cover-up, he realized. This is genocide disguised as counter-terrorism operations. He's using government resources to conduct mass murder of American citizens. The intercepted orders included specific instructions for the disposal of evidence and the creation of false documentation that would support the terrorist incident narrative. Media coordination was pre-planned, with talking points prepared to explain the deaths as successful. Prevention of domestic terrorism threats. Daniel felt the weight of their father's foresight as he realized the scope of what David Brennan had anticipated and prepared for. Dad knew this moment would come, he said, studying the operational protocols their father had designed for exactly this scenario. He understood that exposure would trigger elimination protocols, and he prepared for us to be the focal point of their response. The communication intercepts provided specific timing and deployment information for the elimination teams, including the identities and capabilities of operatives assigned to neutralize Phoenix network assets. Most of the teams were composed of private contractors rather than government personnel, providing plausible deniability for Hawthorne while ensuring operational security through personnel who had no constitutional obligations. "We have less than 18 hours before they begin," Marcus said, calculating response times based on the deployment schedules. "After that, everyone who survived the original purge will be dead, and all evidence of the illegal activities will be destroyed along with the witnesses." The brothers realized that their father's protocols had been designed for this exact moment, the final confrontation between the surviving assets and the forces that had destroyed the program. David Brennan had prepared them not just to expose the conspiracy, but to serve as the coordinating center for a resistance operation that would either succeed completely or result in the elimination of everyone involved. Daniel accessed the Phoenix network's emergency communication protocols, transmitting the intercepted intelligence to surviving assets who had been waiting decades for confirmation that their elimination had been authorized. The response was immediate and coordinated, revealing a network that had maintained operational readiness despite years of persecution and surveillance. All units confirm receipt of termination authorization, came the first response from Raven 6. Phoenix protocols now active. Primary assets confirmed as operational command center, awaiting coordination for exposure operations. The network had prepared for this moment as thoroughly as David Brennan had prepared his sons. Assets were positioned throughout government agencies, media organizations, and law enforcement structures, ready to simultaneously release evidence and testimony that would expose the conspiracy while providing protection against retaliation. Marcus understood that they had become the central command for an operation that would either restore constitutional government or result in their deaths, along with everyone who had tried to preserve the evidence of systematic corruption. The choice was no longer whether to fight, but how completely they were willing to commit to the battle their father had prepared them to lead. The broadcasting equipment, Daniel said, realizing the final element of their father's strategy. We're not just coordinating the exposure. We're the primary transmission point for evidence that will reach every major media outlet, law enforcement agency, and government office simultaneously. The intercepted communications had provided them with the timing and coordination necessary to implement their father's complete strategy. Comprehensive exposure timed to occur before elimination teams could prevent testimony and evidence from reaching public scrutiny. If we do this, Marcus said, understanding the finality of their decision, there's no going back to anonymous lives. We'll either succeed in exposing the conspiracy completely, or we'll die in the attempt along with everyone who trusted us to honor our father's sacrifice. The intercepted orders represented both the ultimate threat and the perfect opportunity. Confirmation that immediate action was necessary, combined with the intelligence required to coordinate effective resistance against forces that controlled significant government resources. The broadcasting equipment that Marcus activated at precisely 0600 hours represented the culmination of decades of preparation and sacrifice. The military-grade transmission system overrode civilian communication networks across 12 states, simultaneously delivering evidence packages to every major media outlet, law enforcement agency, and government office, while coordination protocols guided Phoenix network assets in synchronized operations against conspiracy targets. Daniel monitored multiple data streams as terabytes of evidence flooded communication networks faster than they could be suppressed. Video testimonies from their father, audio recordings of Eleanor's conversations with handlers, documented authorizations for assassination operations, and financial records proving systematic corruption reached thousands of recipients within minutes of transmission initiation. Primary broadcast successful, Daniel reported, watching confirmation signals from media outlets that indicated evidence packages had been received and were being processed for immediate publication. Secondary transmissions confirm Phoenix network assets have initiated simultaneous operations at target locations. The coordination required split-second timing that leveraged Marcus's tactical leadership capabilities and Daniel's technical precision. While Marcus managed real-time intelligence from field operations, Daniel maintained communication links with assets conducting evidence-gathering operations at government facilities across the country. Raven 6 confirmed successful penetration of Senate Intelligence Committee archives, came one field report. Original Operation Sanctuary files recovered and transmitted. Target building secured for media access. Marcus tracked multiple simultaneous operations designed to gather additional evidence while providing protection for the primary exposure broadcast. Phoenix network assets had spent years positioning themselves within government agencies, law enforcement organizations, and private contractor companies. Waiting for this coordinated activation, Phoenix 7 reports successful breach of private contractor databases. Another transmission confirmed. Financial records linking Senator Hawthorne to assassination operations, now secured and transmitted to federal prosecutors. The broadcasting system allowed them to monitor government communication frequencies in real time, watching as the conspiracy's control networks attempted to coordinate suppression efforts while dealing with simultaneous exposure across multiple fronts. Hawthorne's voice appeared on intercepted communications, his composure disintegrating as he realized the scope of the evidence being released. Initiate communication blackout protocols, Hawthorne ordered through encrypted channels. Deploy all available assets for site suppression. Authorization is total operational authority. Daniel realized that their success had triggered the most dangerous phase of the operation, the moment when conspiracy leaders would abandon all pretense of legal authority and deploy lethal force to prevent further exposure. The elimination teams originally scheduled for coordinated operations were being redirected to suppress the broadcasting center and eliminate the primary witnesses. Incoming aircraft signatures. On approach vectors, Marcus reported, monitoring radar feeds from the Phoenix network's surveillance assets. Military helicopters, armed configuration. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. The brothers had prepared for this final confrontation by transforming the cabin and surrounding valley into a defensive position that leveraged their father's tactical expertise and their own inherited capabilities. The terrain provided natural advantages that professional military training could exploit against technologically superior opponents. Evidence transmission 87% complete, Daniel reported, maintaining focus on their primary mission despite the approaching threat. Critical files are already public. Additional material will provide prosecutorial support if we survive to testify. The Phoenix Network's coordination proved as sophisticated as their father's strategic planning. As elimination teams converged on their position, assets throughout the government structure were simultaneously providing evidence to prosecutors, journalists, and oversight officials who had not been compromised by the conspiracy. Federal Bureau of Investigation confirms receipt of evidence packages. Came a transmission from an asset within law enforcement. Investigation protocols activated. Arrest warrants being prepared for Senator Hawthorne and associated individuals. Marcus understood that their survival of the next hour would determine whether the exposure operation succeeded completely or provided only partial justice. The evidence was public, but conspiracy leaders still controlled significant resources and would attempt to eliminate key witnesses before legal processes could provide protection. Broadcasting system configured for automated continuation, Daniel reported, implementing protocols their father had designed for exactly this scenario. Evidence transmission will continue even if primary operators are eliminated. The approach of elimination teams represented both immediate danger and ultimate validation of their father's sacrifice. David Brennan had anticipated this moment and prepared his sons to serve as the focal point for resistance operations that would either restore constitutional government or die in the attempt to preserve its principles. Phoenix assets confirm successful coordination, Marcus reported, monitoring field operations that were proceeding according to plans their father had developed years before their birth. Primary objectives achieved. Secondary missions proceeding on schedule. Daniel felt the weight of inherited purpose as he realized they had successfully honored their father's legacy by completing the mission he had died preparing. The evidence was public, the conspiracy exposed, and legal accountability initiated through processes that the conspirators could no longer control or suppress. Elimination teams on final approach, Marcus announced, preparing defensive positions with the calm professionalism that marked their genetic heritage. Primary mission accomplished. Time to see if Dad's tactical training was as good as his strategic planning. The broadcasting equipment continued its automated transmission even as armed helicopters appeared over the valley's rim, ensuring that whatever happened in the next few minutes, the truth about Operation Sanctuary would survive to guide prosecution and justice. The new deed and title that arrived by secure courier 6 months after the successful exposure, operation bore the official seal of the Federal District Court and represented legal recognition of their rightful inheritance. The document confirmed Marcus and Daniel's ownership of not just the cabin, but the entire valley surrounding it, property that had been held in trust by the government since their father's death and was now restored to his legitimate heirs. Judge Patricia Morrison had personally overseen the legal proceedings that resulted from the evidence broadcast, ensuring that the brothers received both justice and compensation for decades of systematic persecution. The property deed represented more than real estate ownership. It was official acknowledgement that David Brennan's sacrifice had been vindicated and his sons' courage had restored constitutional principles that powerful people had violated for personal gain. Daniel studied the legal language that transformed their sanctuary from hideout to legitimate home. The property boundaries encompassed the entire watershed, ensuring that no future development could compromise the valley's security or natural beauty. More importantly, the deed included special provisions that designated the land as a memorial to victims of government overreach, protecting it from future seizure or surveillance. Dad would have been proud, Marcus said, examining the detailed surveyor's maps that showed the full extent of their inheritance. The property was larger than they had realized, including high meadows and ridge lines that provided natural defensive positions, along with hundreds of acres of pristine wilderness that could serve multiple families seeking sanctuary from persecution. The legal proceedings had exceeded their most optimistic expectations for justice and accountability. Senator Hawthorne faced federal charges for conspiracy, murder, and violations of constitutional rights, with additional defendants, including agency administrators and private contractors who had participated in illegal surveillance and assassination operations. The trials were proceeding under special prosecutors appointed by judicial panels that had not been compromised by the conspiracy. Phoenix Network assets confirm successful integration. Into witness protection protocols came a secure communication from Raven 6, who had survived the final confrontation and was now coordinating support for other surviving families. Legal proceedings on schedule. Congressional oversight hearings scheduled for public sessions. The sanctuary that their father had prepared was now serving its intended purpose for multiple families whose lives had been shattered by Operation Sanctuary's illegal activities. Marcus and Daniel had expanded the cabin's facilities to accommodate other survivors while maintaining the security protocols that made the valley a genuinely safe haven from retaliation. Daniel found deep satisfaction in transforming the isolated refuge into a community center for people who understood the value of constitutional principles and the cost of defending them. Children whose parents had been murdered for refusing to participate in illegal surveillance now played in meadows, where their fathers had hidden evidence that eventually brought justice. The memorial dedication is scheduled for next month, Marcus said, reading correspondence from the federal judge who had become an advocate for Operation Sanctuary survivors. Congressional leaders will attend, along with family members of operatives who were killed for refusing to violate their constitutional oaths. The memorial would honor not just David Brennan and his brothers, but all the operatives who had died defending constitutional principles against systematic corruption. The valley would serve as both sanctuary for survivors and reminder to future generations about the price of maintaining democratic institutions against those who would abuse them for personal gain. Daniel worked on artistic projects that documented their journey from wandering to purpose. creating visual narratives that would help other families understand their own experiences with government persecution and systematic deception. His sketches and paintings captured both the beauty of their sanctuary and the cost of the freedom they had fought to preserve. Eleanor confirms her testimony schedule for the final hearings, Marcus reported, reading secure communications from the woman who had risked everything to protect them during their childhood. Her evidence about systematic child monitoring has resulted in additional charges against current intelligence officials. The community that had grown around their sanctuary included former operatives, their families, journalists who had helped expose the conspiracy, and legal advocates who continued working to prevent future abuse of intelligence authorities. The valley had become what their father had envisioned, a place where people who valued constitutional principles could find both safety and purpose. Training protocols are showing excellent results, Daniel said, reviewing reports from programs that taught survival skills, constitutional law, and resistance techniques to people who might face future persecution for defending democratic principles. Next-generation assets are being prepared for very different purposes than their parents served. The deed and title represented more than property ownership. They symbolized the transformation of a place designed for hiding into a center for education and community building. The sanctuary had evolved from desperate refuges to hope for the future, providing both practical safety and philosophical foundation for defending constitutional government against systematic corruption. Marcus stood on the cabin's rebuilt porch, watching children play in the meadow where federal agents had once searched for evidence to use against their families. The laughter and security those children enjoyed represented the ultimate victory, a future where constitutional principles were protected by people who understood both their value and their vulnerability. The valley had found its true purpose as sanctuary, not just for the persecuted, but for the principles that made persecution unnecessary in a genuinely free society.